It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here tonight to hear poet Gary Lark read from his work. I am the president of Art Center East and on the board of directors. And I'm really happy to welcome you all here tonight. This is our third Wednesday. So we have the 3 and the W. It's our third Wednesday literary reading, the Art Center East writing project. We like to have writers read as featured readers, and then we follow the featured reader with a little open mic at the end. So that's the format for tonight. As I said before, I will put some links into the chat so that you can find Art Center East and you can find Gary Lark's website, so that if you want to donate to the Art Center or buy books, you are welcome to do that. It's my pleasure to introduce my good friend and colleague, Amelia Ettinger, who's going to introduce Gary. Amelia.
Thank you, Nancy. It's really fun to see so many of you that I have not seen because of what's happening in the world right now, right? So right up over the blues, there's a lot of names that I recognize, and I wish I could be there present with you. Gary, who is a lifelong Oregonian, has worn many hats in his life. And I met Gary, I'm not sure what year, but it was one of the first times that I went to an Oregon Poetry Association meeting. And that's where we met. That was held in Eugene. And then shortly after that, we shared a co-editorial responsibilities with Early Press, where he worked as an editor until this year. This year was his end of his 3-year tenure with Early Press. And at Early, I can tell you that we absolutely love his calm and thoughtful contributions. He has a keen eye for poetry. He can recognize instantly a good line, and we miss him sorely. We already had one meeting without him, and it's a vacuum, Gary. We miss you. Gary is a well-known Oregon poet, and his works include Ordinary Gravity, River of Solace, Turtle Island, In the House of Memory, Without a Map, Getting By, and his latest book, Daybreak on the Water, which I think he will be mainly reading from tonight. His poetry really reflects his deep roots, relations, and emotions with Southern Oregon, where he grew up. His poetry also shows reverence to the land, and his gift of imagery makes you want to be in those places and even share those memories with him. Without further ado, I give you Gary Lark.
Thank you, Amelia. It was a privilege to serve on the Early board with you and to learn in that process quite a few things. I was just thinking about the last time I read in LeGrand, and it was in October, and I had driven over the Crater Lake Highway and then up and through the John Day Valley and up through Long Creek and Ukiah and over the mountain. And it was just a stunning drive with the choke cherries turning colors and the tamarack and aspen patches in the woods. It was just beautiful. So I have a soft spot for LeGrand. This book is about my life in the Umpqua Valley. I grew up in the Umpqua Valley. And the Umpqua River was perhaps my mentor for most of my life, and still is, even though I don't get there as often as I used to. But it gave me a lot, whether I was swimming or um, fishing or whatever. It was always there. And my parents always thought if I was on the river, I couldn't be in too much trouble. So it was good to have that river as my friend. I would endeavor later on in life to go to town to find some trouble, but I'm going to start with Yellow Boat. I'm going to be looking down because my bifocals don't work with the screen very well, so I'm going to be reading from the paper. Yellow Boat. This was set in the 1950s. The skeletons were pieced together in Dale's backyard. Twin boats, modified V-bottom, Chris Craft pattern, built on weekends or after work, thin plywood on fir ribs and oak strips, steamed in irrigation pipe to fit a mold for keel or gunnels. Fiberglass laid over the plywood, painted and painted again, yellow and black. Not one of those runabouts you see in the movies. These were fishing boats, good ones for the river or bay. It sat on the water at the end of the road, outboard and gear left spring, summer, and into the fall. That's the way it was, and nobody ever lost so much as a sinker. We fished, hunted ducks, and cruised the water below the forks for 10 years in the only, by God, lemon yellow boat on the entire Umpqua River system. Wooden boats were green or painted blue. When fiberglass and plastic came in, they were white and red, but it would take me years to see a yellow boat, another yellow boat, and it was towing skeezers. Years later, I pondered why my mild-mannered father chose yellow. My mother cleared it up. When they were dancing to swing music in 1938, my father had a golden sash sewn in his bell bottoms that would flash on every turn. In my early life, we lived in Garden Valley, which is west of Roseburg, and we lived on a little lane. That down at the end of the lane was the main Umpqua, so that's where I spent most of my time. This is called Wells Creek Run. Arlene's Cafe is, I'm going to refer to Arlene's Cafe in the poem, and Arlene's was a cafe in Elkton, well, still is, but the one I'm talking about burned down, and it was sort of a landmark, but Wells Creek Run. Dawn not yet come, we're in father's work truck making for the lower river. He smells of coffee and tobacco, though he's not smoking. The heater pumping on our feet. A muzzy light starts in the trees, and the river comes to us curling around the hills, as if there was nothing before the living water and the trout upon its wet nerve. Over halfway there, we meet Sonny at Arlene's Cafe. There's steam and smoke, loggers and fishermen, clouds of conversation, our feet on straight-grained fir cut from the first 100 feet of a 300-year-old tree 50 years ago. I feel the spring in the oiled planks when we walk to a table and order sausage, eggs, and potatoes. We pull up to the Wells Creek Bridge and wrestle the aluminum boat from the top of Sonny's station wagon. We slide it down we slide it down the creek spill to the glass face of river, motor and tackle, and then We're moving out into the mirror of maple leaves and grass and the sleeping house on the other side. I wonder about it, not seeing a road or bridge or even a boat. Maybe it sprouted there like a mushroom. The troll wake lines disappear among the rocks and shadows. Sonny smokes Chesterfields and fidgets, checking his line, running the motor, talking about fishing the bay down the river when he was young. The sun comes through a gap ahead of us. The chug purr of the Evinrude, the bobbing rhythm of spinners, the suspended life before, the dangling life after. We are held in a separate universe, this river air. And every chance we had, we went camping up the North Umpqua, and I'm sure some of you have been there. It's a beautiful river, and it's a big section of it is fly fishing only. It was then too. Now it's catch and release. Uh, a few years ago, it wasn't catch and release, so we ate some of the fish. This is called Copeland Creek. Long before they were paved, we drove the stutter of washboard roads, pounded endlessly by log trucks, 30 miles up Adams' bony ribs to a paradise called Copeland Creek. We camped where this creek spills into the North Umpqua. I was 8 years old and the river sang. After sleeping in the river's voice, my father, his friend, and I put fly rods together, mine a 9-foot bamboo with mended tip and casting reel full of fly line. We waded pool to pool, side to side, the flash of silver filling our creels. There were pools too deep, so the closest man would grab my free hand and pull me half swimming to the next gravel bar. Back at camp, morning light still filtering through fir needles, Mother tended Dutch oven biscuits as trout curled in the frying pan. There's a part of me still there, surrounded by enormous trees, the river singing me alive. This one's called Golden Mean. Uh, there's a there's something in mathematics called a golden ratio, which shows up in nature, um, and golden mean is another name for that. This is my take on it. To be at once the mountain, the valley, and the trout that swims between. Still in Garden Valley, this one's called Industry. Crystal was 45 when she started to make those crazy things. They lived across the pasture from us on a little hill. She'd always been good with the sewing machine, clothes for the kids, pillows, shawls, little cloth boxes at Christmas. But then these strange, odd, peculiar things started to show up at the county fair. Dogs with alligator heads, snakes with human heads and belled tails, a turquoise starfish with a moon face, 4 lifelike kittens on a sofa cushion. A store owner uptown bought a few and put them in the window. One of his drummers took a couple to a show in Denver. In 3 years' time, she had half a dozen neighbors sewing for her in a converted barn. The following year, her husband Bob leased out his pasture and hayfield. We started to see Bob down at the river in a new boat. We'd anchor by him at the forks and shoot the breeze, the warm sun washing over us. At the forks is still there, and now there's a county park there. But we used to fish there and anchor 2 or 3 boats near each other, and you could pass the time and pass some gossip at the same time. Might even catch fish. Speaking of catching fish, this is we then moved up to near Whistler's Bend, and that's where this takes place. Water worn. Bill and I are upriver from Pete's house, fishing the slick above a rapids before it bends at the bluff and heads toward town. Bill hooks into a steelhead about 2/3 of the way across. It does a tail dance, then heads downstream on the other side of some rocks. Bill's line gets hung up, so I strip off and swim out above the problem, angling with the current to hit the rock, lift the line, and go left of the rock while the fish runs out ahead of me. It works like a charm, except the fish throws the hook. I kick my feet up in front and float through the channel with a few water-worn bumps hitting my butt on the way. There are spots I wouldn't do this, but I've slid through this kind of water before just for fun. And you have to look out for the rocks just below the surface that bulge the water with a point. Those are the ones that aren't very forgiving. From that house, there used to be a spot that was kind of a chute with flood gravel that had been washed in there. And I used to go up to the head of it and swim down through there with feeling the worn feeling of those washed rocks under me for like 25 yards or something. It was marvelous. We waded when we fished, and my father was a mill worker, and he I think may have saved some money by not causing us to have waders, those rubberized waders, because he always said they were dangerous. I think they might have been expensive too. Wading. When I'm thigh deep, the mood of water moves me like wind holds and challenges a bird. It's no weak wondering. It carries the trial of mountains, the life and death of unnumbered creatures, fish and crawdads, snakes and snails, the wonderment of living things, whispered in the mud and sand, in rock, crevice, and root. I am in it, of it. I don't think I ever felt more at home than thigh deep in a river. I got to know maybe a couple of miles of that river very intimately. Every rock, every curve of the river, and that's sort of infinite, because every curve has another curve, and every ripple has another ripple, and the rocks are continuously changing, but always the same. Um, but you know, innocence doesn't last forever. I was After high school, I was working at the VA hospital, working swing shift. This is about 1965. Swing shift allowed me to fish in the mornings. So handy. This is called in stream. It was a beautiful in between. The sky hanging bright from here to forever, where dawn and I anchored, the North Fork lapping its music against the hull. It was a long moment, a pause, a bubble in space time. I was back from the cattle call induction center where a young doctor classified me 1Y and sent me home. The Vietnam War raged over the horizon, having already taken classmates. And here I was cradled on the buoyance of this stream and the reprieve I knew to be vulnerable. But here in the golden eye of summer, isolated from the currents on shore, I fished with almost complete freedom. I worked at a VA hospital with veterans from World War I, World War II, and Korea. I knew the hunted, haunted, and broken, all the variations on disturbed brains, wards of men living a slow dying, locked in rooms and hallways, beyond any known help. We took care of their daily needs, kept them safe and fed. A few would arise from catatonic stillness and go home to the barrage of the world, then come back in a few months. In a year, I would join the Army National Guard. In two, I would be in Fort Lewis, running the courses ground smooth by thousands of other feet. Water slapped the fiberglass hull, nothing on the line but a spinner and the pull of the current. That building that I worked in was actually half of it, there was 3 floors and half of it was locked, half of it was open. So I worked in the locked part, so that's why it's registered for me. Back up the river, monsters all. I'm fishing around little grass tufted islands, land a couple, keep one, when I haul in a 10-inch rainbow. Taking out the hook, I see a little head down its gullet. This greedy fish hadn't digested one meal before going after the artificial bug I offered. Heron and egret, otter and merganser, kingfisher trying to swallow a fish the size of its head, and me, a bunch of marauders on this dappled stream. I slit it open, feed the guts and the half-swallowed fish to the crawdads. Up at the house, I fry it for lunch. We ate a lot of trout. I also had an education, I think, that was markedly unusual. This is called Brockton Store. It was an old place built to supply farmsteads and logging families when horses did the work. A false front, a false front gave majesty to the town that never sprang up around it. Dewey and I would steal empty pop bottles off the back porch, come around and trade them in for full ones. We'd sit in the summer grass on the hill and back and fish the sky for great ideas. By about 10, I had outgrown the thievery and settled for stories. The oiled wood planks led through a forest of canned goods, bread loaves, and dog food to a large desk and wood stove. A fly tying vise, always in use, was surrounded by capes of feathers, hooks, and chenille. Spinner blades, wire, and jars of beads were racked on the near wall. Fishing poles and hunting rifles lined the opposite wall. I spent all my spare winter hours in one of those stove side chairs. When the air seemed to dry up, I would prompt, "Did you ever catch a sturgeon?" Or, "How far west did the antelope come?" And Ernie from Western Auto, a mile down the road, would put his sandwich down and tell about the old days when they would fish for sturgeon with giant hooks baited with beef liver on clothesline cords. How their tails would drag in the dirt hanging from an 8-foot wagon that was 5 feet from the ground. And Bill, who didn't seem to work anywhere, would say that antelope used to come right up to the timber, but mostly stayed in the sagebrush country where they could see predators a long way off. And Nels would start stalking a smart old buck through the manzanita up on the south side of Spencer Mountain. By high school, I had a few stories of my own. It was somewhere in this time I noticed a new crop of young thieves setting empty bottles on the front counter and getting a knee-high or Hires or Coke. The way I used to. I asked, "You know where they're getting those bottles?" "Oh yeah, it's an old game." "But you're losing money." And he said, "When that breaks me, I guess I'll be broke." That was all he said. I drive by the empty shell on a spring day when the grass grows lush and bright green, running up the sheep pasture where huge oaks stand as before. Paint peels, unseen timbers rot. Empty, no empty bottles on the back porch. It's a pity, I think, speeding down the asphalt, that no one is getting an education there anymore. Like I said, my father worked at lumber mills, sawmills around Roseburg almost his entire life. And when he didn't work overtime, he would come home and we'd go fishing. This is called after work. He would come home with the shape of welding goggles impressed around his eyes. We would throw our fly rods in the back of the truck and head up Little River with a foot of daylight hanging in the west. Not much was said on the way. An early June day sliding beneath us, water singing, father upstream and me down, jumping, wading, fishing the channels. It was all we needed. I fishing was one of the things we could do together. It didn't require anything other than fishing together. And this one's called Last Time. He has emphysema and a bad heart valve the last time we fished the mountain water. He knows the valve can go anytime, refuses replacement surgery, says he's had enough of that. I take the bridge to the other side and he slides down the near bank. Looking into the pool between us, I can see trout hanging in the current. I watch my father catch a fish before I get to where the rapids tail out. It's a big river with fish holding near the current's edge, behind rocks and under shadows, waiting for life to deliver what it will. It will be several years before an oxygen tank is necessary, and this communion with the river is a daydream. So we fish our separate sides of the same water. I catch a few small ones and throw them back. Two keepers in my creel when I head to our rendezvous. He makes it up the bank, stopping now and then to breathe, and I see his 4 fine rainbows. He has bragging rights today. All the water ends up in the ocean sooner or later. Of course, then it comes back if we're lucky. This is called return. Sometimes I forget in the suffer of day what the night remembers, running the long beaches in a rage of freedom. Moon still above the mist, pulling the endless shadow from the sea's belly. Are you rock or bone, breathing me back to water? Spindrift curls in my hand like a sleeping word. We press our salted bodies into the tides of each other, releasing our unutterable selves. I think I'll read 2 more, and then we can have some other readers. This is called Cable Crossing. I'm going to mention the Cable Crossing Hole, which is in the upper North Umpqua. It says what I got to say. Cable crossing. I stop at the cable crossing hole when light just touches the top of the canyon. I slip down the bank under the trees to liquid emerald and roll cast to rings of rising trout. They paid little attention to my muddler or mayfly. I set the fly rod down. This deep green world turns to magic at twilight, and I give in. The fish jump and roll as I breathe the living air. I will be here at 17 and 70, life washing through me, this small infinity. And one last one, it's a little one. It's called Stone. Like water runs around the rounding stone, time swims around the smoothing self that polished becomes nothing but shine. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Gary. That was fabulous. I'd like those who are interested in asking some questions to feel free to unmute. And I'll just ask, I've got a question for you. I love the phrase fish the sky. And oh, can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Okay. Can others hear me? Okay, Then someone else ask Gary a question.
Huh.
Gary, can you hear me?
Everybody else can hear you but me?
I think so.
Oh, well, I guess you heard me.
Oh no. It went out.
Yeah,
Can you hear anybody?
I can't hear anybody.
Uh-oh. We can hear you.
Yeah, take him
Maybe I'll
out.
do this.
Can you hear us now?
Try it again.
Can you hear me now? I sound like a commercial.
Very, 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 very softly.
Can you take your headphones off and go through the computer? Can you hear better now?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Can you hear me here?
Great.
Gary, I have a question.
Yes.
Does your poem on the golden ratio, does it actually, you do the syllables and divide it and actually get the ratio? I haven't tried to see if it did.
Sure. No, let me know if you figure that out, because this was more concept than math, I'm afraid.
You know, my minor was math.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
And that'd be wonderful to know.
Well, I have a question, Gary. I really like the phrase "fish the sky," which came up in one of the poems, and I wonder if you see an alignment between fishing and poetry, or did poetry live with you while you fished? How does that work?
I think it is much the same, although, so I think there's so much wisdom in a river that it's like just waiting for it to show you what it can do and what's there, um, and uh, and it's real and it's metaphorical. It has everything, and one of the main things it has is flow. It's movement. And the old saw about you can't step in the same river twice. The idea that it is the same river, but not the same river, is like a conundrum. And I think poetry is like that. That when we're past describing something or capturing something, sometimes we can lift the lid and there's something more. There's something ineffable, something that is instructing us on how the cosmos works, you know?
Lovely, thank you. Great. Are there other questions for Gary?
No, I really liked your work, though. I didn't have any questions. You grew up in that area around the Umpqua River, right?
Yes.
Oh, I do have a question. What part of it? That's in Oregon, right? Which part?
It's in southern Oregon, southwestern Oregon.
Southwestern, okay.
The Umpqua, the Rogue, and the Klamath rivers all start in the Cascades and run through the coastal mountains to the ocean. They're the three main ones that actually run that far. So they have more water, more fish runs, that sort of thing.
Yeah. See, this year we were going to visit, and of course, with the virus,
Yeah.
we haven't got anywhere. So.
But it's a good place to go and just watch the river.
Yeah.
I do that now. My hand still twitches for the fly rod, but you know.
I think one of the things I love this book so much is that liberation that you see in childhood in a time that Isabel Allende calls it loving negligence. Um, and I think that's a beautiful term because it gave the opportunity to explore the world without parental uh, constraints. And you show that a lot of that in your enthusiasm with the fishing and the water and the connection that I'm afraid some of that is lost in this new generation, especially the little ones. Um, you don't see 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds going to the river and fishing by themselves. Now, if a parent did
Okay.
that, they will be in jail. And that is such a lost, beautiful thing. And preserving it in a book like this is valuable. I mean, it's something that teaches parents the freedom of a child to explore the natural world without those constraints. And thank you for your reading. It was very lovely. I loved it. Well, I like all of your books anyway.
I was going to ask you one thing. Have you read any Andrew Hudgens?
Who?
Andrew Hudgens. He's a pretty renowned writer. He's
I don't
won a
think I have.
Pulitzer. Well, your voice reminded me of his. And let's see, something about break. I can't remember the title now. Breaking Glass. But he comes from a Christian background. But he's not this good little boy. And these were several scenes from his youth. The whole book is, and it's. I've read some of his other things, but I've been reading it lately, and it calms me. And yet, your voice reminded me of his and that. I thought of that book. Yeah,
Thank
it's Hudgins, Andrew. But you might look him up. He's got a number of books on Amazon and things.
Great.
Yeah, he's a pretty renowned writer. He's very good.
Great. Are there
Amelia,
other questions for Gary?
I got a question. Gary, thanks so much. That was great.
well,
Got my copy here. Love it. Read it several times already. Great to hear it in your voice. This is from Flowstone Press. Tell us about working with Flowstone Press and some of the other presses that you've been with.
well, Flowstone was great. I had it accepted somewhere else, but I didn't like the deal, so I was dragging my feet. And the deal was I would need to buy 125 copies at retail. It just didn't seem right to me somehow.
Mm-mm.
And so I ran it by Michael and Ryan at Flowstone, and they said, "Oh yeah, this should be an Oregon publisher anyway." So working with them was great. I had seen the cover photo before. I had worked with this this photographer before, and so I knew kind of where I was going and what I wanted, and they were very good to work with. They just wanted to put out the best book that I could put together and they could put together. So it was great, and they're fair, and they want to do the best job they can. So. And this was just coming after my experience with Airly Press, which is, for the people who don't know, it's a 3-year experience where you work as an editor and a poet, and you put out a book of your own, but you also help edit and put out books for other people that are then in that process. And so you learn a lot. You learn quite a little bit about um, everything from marketing to how to fit things together, and also you have the experience of being with people who have the same goal of putting out good books, and nice looking books as well. So they're pulling for you, which is always nice to have people around you that want your work to be as good as it can get. Um, the other ones are sort of variations of those themes. Working with um, Jonah Borstein on one book, um, it was similar to having the last book, because he wanted to work with my ideas. It wasn't I didn't just turn it over to him or them. So it was nice to have that input and the back and forth with the publisher.
How about
Good
one
to
more
see you,
question
Todd.
for Gary?
I'd like to ask a question. Hi, Gary. It's Amy.
Hi,
Hi.
Amy.
Could you, I was really struck by your story poems. I'm always struck by your story poems. And the one that particularly struck me tonight was the one about the woman who sewed the unusual art objects and then ended up apparently making quite a lot of money off of it. And what I loved about that, and what I often like about those poems of yours, is what you left out and how much of the story you told and how much of the story you didn't tell. Like you took it to a point and then it stopped. And then it's like, we had to fill in the rest of the story. And I just wonder if you could talk about, deciding how much of the story to tell. And if you start with more and take details out, like how does that work in your mind when you're doing that?
Well, I'll consult my mind and see. On that particular poem, I didn't have an idea of where it was going, but it felt so natural to end up at the river. And some of it was absolutely true. Of course, sometimes I lie a little bit, but it was also true that she did make this sort of burgeoning empire on the back of their sheep farm, and he decided he would do some more fishing. So leaving things out, there used to be something called leaping poetry. The people called it leaping poetry, and I think one of the things that was in the 70s, I think, that kind of instructed me that you don't have to say everything. You don't have to actually describe the road up to their house to know it's on the hill, unless that road is significant. And that significance is like finding the crystals, finding that stuff that's in there that makes it the poem. And leaving it out means, of course, that the reader can also discover the crystals.
Excuse me, I was going to say, we were always taught this iceberg theory. You only show the tip of the iceberg in a poem.
Yeah. And
I
how do you
can't remember if it's
suggest?
John Chardy, somebody famous. They all merged together now.
And how do you
My
suggest the
instructors.
rest of the iceberg?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Gary. Let's give Gary a big round of virtual applause. Thank you very much.
Dogs barking.
So glad to have you here tonight. So
Thank you.
we're
Very good. Very good.
we're going to transition into our open mic. We have a couple of readers who will read at the end. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. And then we will, and Amelia has an announcement to make. So I think I'll let her do that while I'm getting my act together on this end. And then if there are folks who would like to read, just put in the chat or click yes on the participants list and we'll get you in the list. Amelia?